Hello, everyone, and welcome to Situ's Beyond Booking webinar, Lost in Translation, the US and UK Accommodation Conversation. I'm Jessica, Situ's Marketing Engagement Manager, and it's great to have you with us. Quick housekeeping, just to let everyone know we are recording today's session. If you're new to us, Situ, we are a global accommodation specialist who support mobility and travel teams with flexible, high-quality accommodation, making complex programs simple and people first. In today's live insight-led webinar, we will be exploring how the US and the UK accommodation markets really work and why understanding the differences matter more than ever. We are delighted to have James, ASAP's Chief Executive, and Barbara, Managing Partner from Deluxe Suites and Deluxe Lodging. Your hosts today are Jake, our Account Manager, and Kristen, our Strategic Partnerships Director at Situ. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Jake.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. For those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, as Jess brilliantly pointed out, I'm Jake, joining you from the UK and co-hosting with one of my favourite people in the world, Kristen McLaughlin, also from Situ, who's joining us from the US. And will be helping us represent the American perspective and keeping me humbled when I inevitably claim that the UK does everything better. For what we're hoping this will be a fun but genuinely useful conversation over the next hour or so. Today's session is called Lost in Translation, the US and UK accommodation conversation. And the idea came from something that we all experience in this industry all the time, which is that we're often talking about the same thing, but using completely different words, definitions, and expectations, depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on. Sometimes that's amusing, sometimes it's slightly confusing, and occasionally it's the reason that we end up with large financial hits or a disgruntled travelling employee and a process that's gone off the rails. So rather than pretend that we all agree, we thought we'd lean into the differences and talk about them properly. And we're really pleased to be joined by three brilliant people from across the industry. Two. We're joined by Barb Hale from Deluxe Suites, who many of you will know as one of the most respected voices in the corporate housing space in the US, and also James Voice from ASAP, representing the UK service department sector and bringing a really important industry perspective to the discussion. So between the four of us, we're hoping to bring a bit of insight, a bit of friendly transatlantic rivalry, and ideally not start an international incident. So before we get into the debate, we wanted to do a bit of a quick pulse check with all of you. So essentially, this is where the confusion usually begins. And so there should be a poll coming up any second, which is going to ask what you define as a long-term stay or extended stay. So what to you is a long stay? At what point does a booking no longer is it no longer transient or a short stay, and essentially determined a long stay? And as I expected, a very wide-ranging selection of answers to that. The majority being 28 plus nights. I think the US team will be thrilled with that. Other is interesting. 3% of you that have said other. More than 6 months. I'm assuming it's not less than 7 nights.
In the US, I would definitely say we think 6 months. On average, Barb, correct me if I'm wrong. Sometimes it could be 90 days, but in the US, I would say primarily long term, we get excited and think it's 6 months plus. Barb, what do you think?
I think anything 6 months plus is exciting in itself. Yeah, that's a long-term stay.
Yeah. Can you dive in a little bit more, Jake, on the UK side for the long term?
Yeah,
you guys look at that?
Marriott, essentially, from my days at Marriott, 5 nights or more, they considered an extended stay. But of course, we're going to come on to terminology in a second in terms of language. But I mean, me personally, I equate it to how would I feel staying in a hotel? At what point would I not want to be in a hotel any longer from a comfort perspective? And for me, it would probably be about 5 nights. But
5 nights.
Yeah.
And I think
longer
that also,
stay.
would that have to do a lot with the service department where you guys have a lot more flexibility and can do more of the nightly stays, where here in the States, technically a 12-month lease with an apartment complex is standard. And to get a short-term lease, it's 90 days usually is the minimum. So I think that's where we start with the 6-month plus with our terminology for long-term. I'm wondering if that's the break in the communication there.
Yeah, and that's essentially it, isn't it? Is extended stay, long-term stay, mid-term stay, short-term stay. There's all of these definitions, but none of them are actually defined, I think, is what we're finding.
And that was, Jake, just to support what you're saying, it's so tricky, isn't it? Because looking at who stays in service departments in the UK is one thing, and how long they're staying is something completely different. So extended stay or apart hotel products, anything over a few nights is a long stay. But of course, in a corporate environment, 90 days, 28 days, 90 days, something like that would be considered a long stay. So it really depends also, and this is where the terminology issues come. Who are we talking about? Who is the customer and how long are they staying?
Yeah, and leading nicely on from that, James, and if we can't define long-term stay amongst us by the length of the stay, let's try and do it with words. So what word do you use to describe your offering is the next poll, which will be coming up now. And again, it's just what term do you actually use to describe your offering? So is it corporate housing, service department, extended stay? It depends who I'm talking to. I think this one is a clear sort of transatlantic difference, right? You guys call it corporate housing, we call it service department, which is weird because we don't even call our homes apartments, we call them flats. But a service flat isn't very sexy, I guess, in a on a quote, and so we use apartments just for this specific thing. It's not something we would use really day to day to describe, as I said, our homes. So.
And I would say here in the States, we usually use corporate housing, furnished apartments, or temp living, I think are the three main terminologies that we utilize. Again, when and why, I'm not quite sure. I think, again, it depends on who the audience is and when we choose to use one of those different terms.
Yeah, and it's exactly the point. In many ways, we're all operating in the same sort of space, but depending on where you sit in the world, or sometimes even which industry body you belong to, the language changes completely. And it's not really just industry terminology, though. The UK and US have always had a habit of describing the exact same thing in totally different ways. So clearly, we are struggling to agree on what extended stay actually means, let alone what we call it. And what we thought we'd do first is, because the UK and US have a long history of describing the exact same thing in completely different ways, and I should say this has been a source of friendly debate between Kristen and I, or affectionate arguing, as I like to call it, is everything from wardrobe to closet, from biscuit to cookie, lift to elevator, and of course the most important question, which is which side of the road you're supposed to drive on. Answer obviously is the left-hand side.
Even though we do drive on the right side.
Yeah, the right-hand side. I will present conclusive evidence as to why we drive on the correct side of the road later. Kristen might dispute
I
that.
also I have a couple more to add. I connected with our guest care team, who are the front lines working both with our UK, the MIA teams, and also across the world. And a few that I just found really interesting that we really don't think about is like hamper versus welcome basket. A hamper here in the States is actually where you put your dirty clothes. Dirty clothes basket is called a hamper, but with our UK team, they love to deliver hampers, welcome baskets for the guest. Another one that actually made me laugh yesterday that I actually never thought about was underground versus subway. In the UK, they say underground, we say subway. And as our guest care team said yesterday, subway is a sandwich.
Yeah,
so I got to get a laugh about that where we say subway. Another one that I think is really tricky is biweekly and fortnightly. If you think about the term biweekly for housekeeping, it really truly, you would think it's more twice a week versus every other week, but we use biweekly. You guys say fortnightly, and here in the States, it makes me think of the video game. So those are little things that I absolutely find fascinating in the different terminology.
Jake, can you explain to me what fortnightly
every fortnight. So a fortnight being 2 weeks, 14 days. So fortnightly is, yeah, every 14 days. And bi-weekly actually means both things. It means twice a week and every other week, by definition, if you have a Google or a Chat GPT or whatever sort of search engine you're using. So it's interesting that, again, that same word means the same thing twice. But do you not use fortnightly then in the US? Is that not like, or a fortnight?
I
Is
have
that not
never
a
said that
metric?
word one day in my life.
It's
And if you put a hamper in my service department, I don't want it. If you put a welcome basket in my service department, I really want it.
Yes.
Just referencing as well how you two have turned up in your matching USA jumpers today, for anyone that didn't notice.
Jumpers,
Sweaters.
Jumper versus a shirt.
Sweatshirts.
We had to represent.
My cursor has disappeared. It's back. I found it. Sorry, I'm just finding my.
Well, I love actually a lot of things that have kicked this conversation off, along with the different terminology I felt, which kind of took from a fun conversation to a more productive conversation, is notice to vacate. That is a term that I realized we all, when you say, do you understand? They say they understand, I say understand, but technically we're saying two completely different things when it comes to notice to vacate, which is extremely important to understand both sides, because they have a complete different understanding, and also, especially on the America side, can be a costly misunderstanding. So Jake, do you want to go in, or do you want to go into what a notice to vacate means in your world?
Well, it's not really a term we use so much. What it really, we translate it, or what we think and we assume it means, is how many days notice you need to give to avoid cancellation charges if you're shortening your stay once in house, essentially. So it's 14 days prior to you leaving. If you give 10 days notice, you'll be charged 4 days. That would be our often misconception of what an NTV is, because it means something totally different. I will try and explain it as to how I think it is, because it's probably still going to be wrong, and you've explained this to me many times. But essentially, it doesn't matter what your checkout date is, you still need to provide whatever the agreed notice to vacate is to confirm you are actually leaving on the date that you've booked until, which to me seems wild, because just book, you've booked till that date. That's the date you've booked till. Why do I need to reconfirm that? Or you go into an extra month's contract, or you'll explain it better than I will ever understand it. So
here in we have, well, one, we're locked into lease agreements, and you've got the lease end date, but that end date is not necessarily firm. And so what we have to do is we require the multifamily. With the apartment community, they usually require 30 or 60-day notice to vacate. Obviously, in our world of corporate housing, service departments, flexibility is key. And we'll need, a lot of times now companies are asking for more for those 14, 15 night notice to vacates, which can be tricky because they're held to lease agreements with the apartment communities that require this 30 and 60-day notice to vacates. But what it is even though it does sound cumbersome and it is a costly mistake and it can be kind of a bear, at the end of the day, I always like to look at the positive. It gives, at the end of the day, it gives the guest the first right of refusal, and it allows them to extend if they need. It gives them that flexibility if they're unsure about their project, if they're looking to purchase a home. We all know that things can kind of go awry there. So it allows them a little bit more flexibility to provide if they're going to need to extend. Here in the States, we don't have the fixed inventory like you guys have, which I am envious of. So if they put it on notice and that apartment gets pre-leased and it's no longer available, the transferee has quite a bit of a hiccup and challenge ahead of them as to finding where they're going to stay, whether it's for just a couple nights, whether it's for another month, because we may not necessarily have that inventory in that same building where they could just do a smooth move to a different unit for a couple nights. They may have to move across town. They may have to go to a hotel. So the notice to vacate actually gives them the first right of refusal. You are required, whether, depending on what the requirement is, 14, 15, 30 days notice prior to the lease end date. Also include business days. So that way we can give enough notice, and then that allows whether it's the provider or the apartment community to know it's now firm, and then they can start pre-leasing and everyone's happy and everyone's on the same page. But
So
it
we
can be
used to-
costly. If you miss it, it will roll over. It can vary. Usually it's day by day. You then have to give that 14-day notice period. So you usually are going to be locked in for at least a minimum of 14 days, unless it's 15 or 30-day notice. Barb, do you have anything to add on that for me? Did I leave anything off?
Thorough. No, I'm good. You just rock that. You're good.
See, we do a slightly similar thing in that we have some providers will offer a guaranteed option to extend, which essentially is up to 14 days before the departure date that apartment is blocked for them to extend should they need to or wish to, but is not if you go up beyond that and you hit that day 13 before departure, it just becomes available to be resold. There's no financial hit on the guest. Sorry, James, you were going to say something.
All I was going to say, I think what's fascinating is the variance between the operating models. So we talked about fixed inventory versus flexible inventory, and that of course will determine the right to vacate or not, because if the inventory is going back because it's variable, then there's no option to extend. And I think that's what I found so fascinating, or fewer options to extend, let's say. But with the fixed inventory that we have here in the UK, then of course there is always options to extend.
Always though? Like what if you're 100% occupied? What do you do with them then?
Does that happen? Is that such a thing? We should put that
Sometimes.
out to the delegates in the room, don't we?
I think having worked as an operator and on that side for a long time as well, so depending on the length of the extension requests, you would potentially book out a 1 night or a 2 night stay to somewhere else to accommodate a 3-month extension. Is one thing that would happen in those cases. But you're right, James. Generally, there's always a no-show or a cancellation, even when you are 100%. But then it depends. If you've got 14 units versus 400, then it's you very well are likely to be fully booked at 14 units in summer months and things like that. So, and interestingly, you were talking about 14 days, Kristen, and we would say nights here. We charge by the night and you charge by the day, which is a bit greedy, really, isn't it? Because you're getting an extra day's revenue.
You do.
Greedy or smart?
It's
fair.
That is the question. Yes, that's definitely been eye-opening, is the switch between the daily and the nightly, for sure. It's definitely a key difference. Barb, do you know the history on why we're daily? I know that's a surprise question for you, but I just thought of it. I wasn't sure.
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, the hotel industry is nightly. I remember a time that I wouldn't even know. Someone put it in the chat, like when this happened, but I feel like it was moons ago, like 15 years ago. And there's always been a slight debate out there on nightly or daily, but I think we all are just really comfortable with the daily. I think it's, a good thing for our industry in the US to be daily.
So essentially, you're charging the day of arrival, and then the day of checkout is charged as a day, essentially. But would you resell the same day, so you're getting double revenue potentially on?
Oh my God, yeah! If I can get my ops team in there, you bet I am. Right. I mean, it's a day. If you think about it, if checkout time is 11 o'clock, right, and you're operating these units, then you got to make sure that your operations team can turn it. And that's always a fun conversation in the US is how long have they been in there? Did they have a dog or a cat? Did they have 7 dogs and a pig? Like, what did they have in their apartment?
Were they a pig?
It's no joke. We just got a lead for a kangaroo. I'm like, come on.
Kangaroo.
Anyway.
Wow. That's a new one, kangaroo.
Yeah, I've had a fish tank aquarium, 30 tropical fish traveling internationally overseas for a 4-week stay, which seemed like a lot of effort to transport a body of water with 30 fish for. And then a single man with 2 guinea pigs. And I think in his 30s, I think that might be why he's a single man traveling with 2 guinea pigs. Before we move on to the next section, I did promise proof that the British are correct about driving on the left, and we had this debate, Kristen, I think nearly 2 years ago now, when we first properly met in Atlanta in July 2024, and you didn't believe me, and then I think you ChatGPT'd it.
That was a painful loss of you were
quite a lot,
having to say you were
doesn't
correct.
It?
Yeah, tastes like vinegar.
Yeah, and
I do think it's a fascinating story.
It makes sense. So essentially, back before Henry Ford popularized the motor vehicle, he also sort of popularized the 5-day working week. So he has quite a lot to answer for, I think. But before that, we used to have horse and cart, and before horse and cart, just horses, and we were generally pretty barbaric. And so we had like jousting and like big swords and shields, and about 90% or over 90% of the world for sure are right-handed, right being the dominant hand. And so we always rode our horses on the left so that we had our right hand, our strong hand, free to attack or defend. And of course, when we moved to horse and carts, we had highwaymen, and it sort of became the same thing. And so it was the British Empire that sort of introduced it for left side driving was in the 1700s. And literally because most people were right-handed and they wanted their sword hand facing oncoming riders, which means, historically speaking, that Britain engineered road safety and America later decided to freestyle it.
Ta-da!
As we do well.
But it makes sense. Like when you put it into that, you're like, oh, of course, that makes total sense. But it also just proves you wrong. And actually, that's a silly thing to say, because we're probably one of like very few countries that drive on the left. Everybody else drives on the right hand side. So I say that expecting a large onslaught of debate post call from people.
Which is right.
Yes.
I do think it would be fun to dive into kind of the different models. Now that we've talked about the notice to vacate in the different language, just to kind of go into more or less kind of the service department model that you guys deliver on. And then Barb and I can kind of dive into the complexities that many may not even know about outside of the US that corporate housing has upon us. And I think it would be great to actually kind of just showcase those two differences.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, here in the UK, right, the stock is, whilst quite fragmented, we've got a lot of large branded sort of single-use developments, but then also a large amount of smaller operators that are in mixed-use buildings. So essentially, they've got a couple of units in that building, but they're operated full-time as a short-term let, service department, corporate housing, extended stay, whatever it is we're using as the definition. But ultimately, they are like your core stock, right? And maybe that's a good way to pivot into you explaining your core versus non-core stock and how that works. But over here, it's that they operate generally as a service department professionally that we would use anyway. All the time, and it's that same apartment is used consistently, which is great for consistency. Everything often looks the same with the same partner in the same building. Of course, again, you're going to explain now why that's not the case in the US.
It's completely different. No, I do envy the consistency, and then also the fixed inventory just makes things a lot simpler in our world. Where the US is definitely, especially post-COVID, pre-COVID, a lot of companies took up as bulk units within apartment communities and kind of had that service department type feel. Especially post-COVID, a lot of corporate housing providers have become more risk adverse. Mirror leasing, I don't know if anybody's heard outside of the Americas, but it's pretty much just taking out a lease term that mirrors exactly what the guest is needing. It's great because it's risk adverse for the corporate housing provider, but it's not so great with flexibility, month-to-month requests that I feel like are pretty much predominant these days. Flexibility is, I feel like, a requirement, especially now, even more so. So it definitely makes it a little bit harder. And because of that, it's really the apartment communities are resident lease focused. And what that means, they primarily are focused on this 12-month unfurnished leases. That's their number one goal. We're kind of second to them. A lot of times the shortest lease term that you can get is a 90-day lease term with an apartment community. So a lot of times those providers are having a look at the demand and able to make risks to make the longer term leases, get the better rates. Also, a lot of apartment communities now have gone to centralized leasing offices, so it makes it harder for the providers to get availability, to get updated answers. And then also the big one is touring. When there's a centralized leasing office and someone's not on site, it's really hard. And it can take a couple days to make sure to get those tours scheduled successfully.
When you say tour, you mean well, we would call it a viewing, essentially. Is what you mean.
I didn't even know that, but yes, exactly. There's, I feel like there's definitely more of an uptick of the guests are wanting more to see, touch, and feel the apartment, where I would say years ago it was you send 3 options, they look at some pictures and they make a decision, and that was it. I feel like today the decision for a corporate apartment or a serviced apartment is a lot more involved. The guests are more involved. They're doing their online research. 9 times out of 10, this isn't their first time, so they're familiar with what they want, what they don't want, and so they're becoming a lot more specific. And with that, it can make it difficult, especially with the online, going to do their homework, looking at the apartment communities. I want this building, it's walking distance to my office. But when you take a deeper dive on our side, that community they might be at their corporate lease maximum. What that means, also, a lot of the apartment communities can't run corporate applications on site. So it also takes the providers are having to work a lot more with the multifamily world to establish those relationships to get more approved on a corporate level. And also, usually they will allot about a 5 to 10% allotment for corporate leases. So if they're at their maximum and you're wanting just a 190-day lease, they'll likely decline it. If you come to them and you want 5-6 month leases, they easily could override that. So it definitely takes strong relationships with the multifamily industry on our side to definitely accommodate a lot of those requests. Also, we've got credit checks, background checks, income verifications that can get involved. And then I will let Barb touch on these 2 that I think are extremely important factors to touch on. Are rates can change by the hour. So I feel like we're always a broken record. Rates and availability are subject to change. And I don't feel like a lot of times, whether it's a corporate client, an RMC, a TMC, sometimes they may not understand what exactly that means or why. It's not a selling tactic. It's actually the truth. And then also why we're not flexible on certain things because of the binding lease agreements and the Fair Housing Acts. And Barb, I would love for you to kind of dive in on your experience on both of those.
Well, it's funny. I had our sales meeting today, and YieldStar, which is the software used on properties to offer the rental rates that they're giving. I understand from my team that you can go on some apartment communities that says we are not YieldStar. We do not use the YieldStar software, which for us is a great thing. So what happens for us is we'll go to a property and say, hey, we need, a unit or an apartment for 6 months. And they say, yep, your, rental rate is $2,200. The customer takes 2 weeks to make a decision, and they come back and say, we want that apartment. Well, that rate just went up to $2,500, right? Sometimes it goes up $500 by the time we offer the rate, the customer makes a decision, go back, and then we have to go back to the customer, and they're almost annoyed because they really do think it's corporate, like we're setting the price, right? So all the relocation events that I go to, the customers are all saying, the corporate customers saying, why is temp housing, why is corporate housing so expensive? I mean, that's another, I'm not touching that one, but YieldStar promotes it's very interesting what YieldStar has done to our industry, and the customers do not understand it. They really don't. So we do our best to educate. Fair housing is also, do you have anything like that, Jake or James, in the UK, like a fair housing? And I'll go into that.
James is going to touch on some of this stuff a little bit later on in this webinar, and sort of what could be coming. At the moment, not really. There is a restriction in London, particularly, which is minimum 90 nights that you can lease your apartment out if it's not got a C1 hotel license. And so outside of London, there isn't in England. Now, Scotland is different, Wales is different, Northern Ireland is different, and James is the expert. I say expert.
I don't know. No expert. Is anyone
because,
an expert? Is anyone an expert on it? But we'll talk about that in a second, because it is complicated, Bob, and I think your point is really relevant, because talking about terminology, it's an understanding of the product that I think we have a problem with here in the UK, and I'll expand on that when we get the second.
Okay. So fair housing is, as I was researching it, I'm like, this is sad that we had to put a policy in place. But basically what fair housing is to say, If Kristen goes in to rent an apartment, I've already rented an apartment, and they say all the blondes are going to live in apartment A, right? And when I was in property management, I don't know why I found this just the best game ever, but I would be in the elevator, I'd be halfway through the tour with a leasing person, and I'm like, oh, the cars in the parking lot look really nice. So you have a really nice demographic living here. You can't, I mean, if they answered, I'd be like, whoop, you shouldn't have answered that, right? But if they answer, it is just to stop the stereotypical that everyone is equal. You treat everyone the same way. And in a nutshell, I mean, I could go on and on about fair housing. That is what that policy states. So it's said that we had to get there, but we do have it, and it is super important in the apartment industry. I mean, it is probably number one of things they need to think about when they're touring apartments and talking to potential residents. Kristen,
It
anything
keeps
to add?
pretty much the protected class. So, it's race, color, national origin, religion,
That's right.
sex, gender, family status, and disability. And also, I feel like on top of that, I feel like we get a lot of requests. I feel like quality and safety, I feel like are number one buzzwords that we get for requests, which make perfect sense. However, here in the States, we cannot say this is a safe neighborhood. We have to say there's no what is it? Safety doesn't have a zip code. Because at the end of the day, it's really a personal choice. Someone moving maybe from Kansas to New York City are going to be a lot more hesitant or maybe worried or have a different level of uncomfortableness.
Yes.
Versus someone moving from London to Kansas, they'll have a different level of what makes them feel comfortable. So that's also where we need to educate that, we always say kind of do your research, do what is, take a look at what's important to you, to make sure that you are comfortable with that area. Of course, quality, we can always check on that, but safety is definitely something that we cannot speak on. Also,
I mean, forever.
we can ask for the number of adults and the number of children, but we cannot ask the sex of who's going to be in the apartment as well. Anybody over 18, and what are the ages of the children under 18? That also applies with the number of people that you can have in an apartment as well. So a lot of those that we are have those less flexibilities just because, but it's nice, as you said, it's sad that we had to get to that point, but it definitely keeps us in check. But
Yes.
On the other side of it, it's also another reason why we have less flexibility on certain things. I was given an example the other day where we had someone that had some water damage in their apartment. So they had to bring in the fans and all of the things, and it took maybe 2 days. And it was an inconvenience. We took care of all of that. However, they didn't want to be in the apartment anymore. It was deemed habitable. There was no sign of mold. They did all of the necessary requirements. And once it's deemed habitable and everything is fine, we are no longer able just to move them because of personal choice. If it was deemed there was mold or any type of a safety issue, then we're able to move them. So that also took another educational piece for our guest. Again, it's not a service department where you can just move across the hall and into a new apartment. So we're definitely held to a little bit more, but I think that's also where communication and education, it's so important to talk about it, because some of these things I don't feel like a lot of people are very familiar with. And then also real quick, before we get to you, James, I wanted to jump into also on why those rates changed by the day or month. And you were mentioning YieldStar, Barb. That is actually a revenue management system that the apartment communities are now running. It's not a sales tactic, it's more of a revenue management. So pretty much what they're doing is they're looking and adjusting their rates based on their availability, the supply, the demand, and the lease terms at that time. So they're able to control who's moving out on certain months. So if there's obviously summer months are very different. So when you come to August and everyone's vacating because they're moving into their new homes or what have you, or starting schools, they're going to be left with a ton of vacancy. So they're going to actually make those rates different to try and fill those apartments as quick as possible. So it definitely can change again by the hour, which is why the kind of wait and see, let's just get a price check and then we're going to come back and then we want to move forward with it 2 weeks later, and it's completely different.
Something, Kristen, you said really quick, which would be another great webinar to have, are the cultures around the world. Because many times someone will come to me and say, hey, I need to take out a 1-bedroom apartment, but they want 8 individuals living in it. right? And again, our laws are 2 heads per bed, right? 2 heads per bedroom. It doesn't fit in a 1 bedroom, right? So it is very difficult because they think it's natural and normal, and we don't. Again, another cultural differences between the US and other countries as well.
And interesting, Barb, you say the laws won't allow it. I was just wondering how that sort of related to where we are. And we wouldn't necessarily have any laws that stopped it, but we would have insurance restrictions on that apartment or on that flat or on that accommodation type that says this apartment is insured for the purposes of whatever, and it will not house any more than 2 or 3 people, whatever it might be that way. So there's no actual legislation that stops it, but it's more around the implications of something going wrong.
That's interesting. That's a good way to say it, though. Yeah,
because that's really serious then, isn't it? People will reconsider if they know that they're not insured.
Right. Well, if they care.
Yeah. That's funny you say 2 heads, Barb. We've always said 2 heartbeats. And a room constitutes a room with a door, a window, and a closet.
But a newborn baby up to a certain age, and I forget the age, can stay in that
2.
room in a, what is it, 2?
1 or 2. Yeah, I think it's 2.
I think it's
1 or 2.
We have a size definition. I think it's 6 foot by 6 foot, or 6 foot by 6 foot is the minimum requirement for it to be classified as a bedroom. I think at university my second year housing was 6 foot by about 6.5 foot in size. It fit a single bed in, and that was it, really, pretty much. But that legally at the time, I don't know if it's changed, was classified as what was defined as a bedroom, sort of in a HMO or a leasing perspective. So it's interesting the different ways that's defined as well, based on whether it's by person, by size, by And
I just saw Emily Hamley, thanks for giving the answer. She actually just said when it's 1-year-old, so up to 1-year-old. So if it's a couple with a 1-year-old or a child, a baby under 1, then they can have a 1 bedroom. If the baby is over 1, then they would be required to have a 2 bedroom.
And I've seen it with dogs before, where they have a pet-friendly policy, but up to 30 pounds in weight, the dog has to be. And you kind of think, are you going to weigh the dog on entry? Like, how do you define? Some small dogs are very heavy, and so it's again a weird definition's weird, right? And context is so important in all of it, because actually, it really is a minefield, and it really is a wild disparity between all of them and what they mean. Often the same, often different, and that's proven right through this conversation and the polls at the start, which shows everybody.
Jake, really quick on that dog thing. I just toured a property 2 weeks ago. Hold on, I got to find a professional way to say this. And they said to weight and breed. They DNA your dog, and we all can figure out how they do that. And that if your dog goes outside and you don't pick it up, they will run the DNA and you will be fined.
Yep.
And so again, if they run the DNA and you've got pit bull, all German Shepherd, all the restricted breeds, they're going to find out.
Yep.
See, German Shepherd not a restricted breed here in the UK. Interestingly. Yeah, that's interesting to know. I have a dog, and I just passive aggressively offer people a dog poo bag that don't pick up there. I was like, oh, did you need a dog poo bag? It doesn't.
So you actually just touched on something interesting. So do you guys not have the dog breeds not as common? The dog breed restrictions not as common over there. So in a service department, you could take a pit bull or a German Shepherd or any of the classified aggressive breeds.
Are banned here to a certain extent. German Shepherds are not, I believe. So they're often used as security dogs here, police dogs, and they're not, as far as I'm aware, but I will be happy to stand corrected on that. But no, German Shepherds aren't. There are some pit bulls, American pit bulls. I'm trying to think of the recent one that was in the news quite a lot here. As well.
There's a register of dangerous dogs, isn't there? And I think that's always under review, and people are looking at it and determining how they behave in public spaces and what they must wear and so on. But I think that's as far as it goes.
bullies.
Can I just pick up a point Sarah's just made there? I think it's really relevant. We were talking about the number of bed spaces in apartment blocks, and she's suggesting regulation would certainly help in the UK. She sees far too many 5 or 6 beds in each room. And one of the things we were going to talk about, I don't know if this is the right time, Jake, but allow me just a couple of seconds just to talk about some of the challenges that I've been having over the last few months, as have some of our colleagues who've been lucky enough to speak to government ministers and policymakers and anyone actually who we can get to speak to our sector, predominantly in the UK, but also in different markets around the areas in which we have members operate. But it is woeful, the lack of understanding that we're seeing from policymakers at the moment. And your point, Sarah, is really interesting, because we are seeing there is a very clear target being placed on, and you're going to use this term short-term rentals very carefully, but certainly in the UK. And when I've had conversations with policymakers, they simply see that the serviced apartment sector in the UK is some kind of simple spectrum of accommodation. At one end, we know we've got the apart hotel products. All of this stuff is perfectly regulated, is clearly well understood, has licenses to operate, meets planning requirements and also building regulations requirements. But there's this whole world on the other end of the spectrum that frightens government ministers. And this has been quite a revelation for us, because we didn't really understand how murky some of the policymakers see this element of the accommodation industry, certainly in the UK. And I think Sarah's point about cramming beds into spaces so the owner, the operator, the host, or whoever you want to call them, can make as much money as they possibly can. Now, we've always talked, since we've had these conversations, about professionalism, about differentiation, and about trying to present a professional, transparent image to our travellers, our guests, whoever we want to call them. But of course, this doesn't help. And where we are at the moment, within the UK and England certainly, is an introduction of something called the registration scheme. And this registration scheme is what Jake was talking about, is in simple terms going to target all our organisations that don't sit at that nice comfortable end, the C1 end, the apart hotel end, the hotel licensed products, but everything else. And effectively, be under no illusion, and I'm not trying to doom monger, that's not what we're trying to do here, but effectively this is going to be the first opportunity for policymakers, local authorities, councils to understand the scale and size of this short-term rental phenomenon in the UK. Now, we know what's happened in Scotland. There's been a requirement for licensing, and in other words, licensing came around before a registration scheme, and there's been huge uproar around the introduction of that scheme and how effective it is or isn't. We're not going to get into that discussion here right now, but interestingly, in England, the registration scheme will identify the scale of the problem. And I think that, again, sorry, Sarah, going back to your point, that will allow local authorities to see what's happening. So if an organisation is operating within a C3 residential environment, excuse me, they will need to register their business and their apartments on the national registration scheme. It's called the statutory registration scheme. So this is going to be an interesting development, and will identify some of those challenges we talked about with the number of occupants in apartments and so on, and differentiate those that are deemed to be unprofessional from those that are deemed to be professional. So we've got our work cut out. There's no doubt about it, and Jake and I have been talking about that a lot. But it's going to be a challenge to differentiate this whole world of professionalism from or the perception of professionalism from non-professionalism. So tricky.
And then there's the with that the 90-night rule that's in London being rolled out essentially across the country. So ultimately the risk is that once the registration happens, that we lose a vast chunk of supply for 270 nights of the year once they go above that 90 nights, and then can't. And it'll be more than that, because essentially, unless you've got a barbers, we were talking about same day check-in check-out from that short stay to your AST, or your license to occupy, or whatever it is that you're going to do instead, it's never going to be the same day, and so we're going to lose more nights, and there's a big risk there. And I think one of the things that strikes me listening to this conversation is that we are still debating terminology that many regulators and governments don't even understand themselves yet. They can't define what is a short-term stay. Back to our question at the start, what is a long-term stay? What is a short-term stay? They can't define. There is no definition. So how they can legislate against something they don't and can't define is interesting to me. History tells us something quite important about that, and that, you know, if an industry doesn't define itself clearly, someone else will eventually define it for them, and that's where we need to really stick together as an industry across the ocean, across the world, as it's not just the US and the UK this is happening in. This is all around the world, and really, for me, the solution is build more houses. We make up.
That's sorry interrupting you, Jake. You're absolutely right,
No.
and that's the motivation here from certainly the UK government, is that there isn't enough homes, affordable homes out there, and there's been suggestions that 1.5 million properties, homes need to be found or built or whatever it is, and there is a suggestion that the residential community, so those where some organisations offer short-term lets within apartments, are technically operating illegally, and those should be allowed to be freed up for residential use. And that is a quick hit for government, if you understand. So rather than building them, they could release a lot of this residential stock very quickly, and that is their motivation.
Yes, and the risk with that, though, is that we know in markets already where that stock exists as it is today, that we're sold out and fully booked, and there's no availability for those business travelers that aren't just driving essentially GDP and economic growth, but the amount they spend. And we know this from the Bonnard study that we did with ASAP James a couple of years ago, as to how much they spend in the local economy as well, which is far more than the person living in that local area too, supporting the local shops. So there's so many financial implications as well if we restrict business travel, because they don't want to stay in a hotel room for 6 weeks. So where do they go?
And that was back to the point that we made right at the beginning: who's using our products? Because if it is business travelers that are coming in and staying for a period of time, then, as you absolutely say, that these are the guys that are investing in the local economy. They're going to eat in restaurants, they're going to the theatre, they're buying product to consume themselves. So they are actually probably investing more in the community than maybe some of the local occupants that we feel that the government may be targeting. So it's really fascinating. It's a whole ecosystem of challenge, and our work here through these conversations is raising awareness with those individual policymakers that may not understand what it is we collectively do and who we introduce into these communities. So that's where it's so important that we come together.
Yeah. And also, why it's so important that you understand markets you're going into if you've not gone into them before, and all of those points Kristen was making about NTV and all of that sort of stuff. Reach out to those experts and ask for advice, and ultimately don't get shot in the foot. Is that a saying that you guys say in the US? Shot in the foot? Does that work?
We do. Yep, absolutely. Yep.
There's always weird phrases like that I then have to find out why we say things like pot kettle black, a pot to something in, and so on. But essentially, I think the most important message today probably isn't UK versus US. It's actually about the industry now working together and unifying on some language or some terminology or some sort of mantra, and championing what we do, why we do it, and not just the impact it has on economic growth, but also on business growth, on local economies, and on mental well-being. Not that there's actually been any official studies into the well-being of travellers using a sort of home from home as opposed to a hotel when travelling, but we know really fundamentally it is much better for people to be able to have that choice and that freedom. So yeah.
If you put in ChatGPT, Jake, and you say, how large, I've done this like 6 times. It's always a different number. How large is the global corporate housing industry? How large in terms of revenue is service department industry, right? It's in the billions. It's always in the billions. Go ahead. Sorry.
We did it. Jake was asking me this question. We just had this discussion recently, but that was more America's based, right? So as a whole,
Yeah.
it'd be
I asked for
fantastic to
global.
see.
I asked for global and it was like $63 billion. So you think to yourself, how does all of property management not know and we won't even get into the relationship between corporate housing and property management companies and why we're here, right? But again, I got like 80 billion and then I got 40 billion, whatever. It's amazing to me that more legislatures, government, they don't know about us.
Here's an opportunity that we were talking about quite recently. So the CHPA and ASAP have talked a lot about releasing some joint data, and the conversation we had is exactly that. You know, we did our study that Jake referred to, which was the Bonnard study that looked at the value of the sector in the UK, and that was many billions of pounds in terms of peripheral spend and direct spend and everything else. So if we scale that up, just as an assumption, you can imagine how powerful our collective argument is. So putting together a professional study that looks at both markets, possibly even Europe, as well as the USA, North America, and any other of the big markets that our business travelers travel to, I think we have a compelling argument to talk about the legitimacy of our sector and how we need to be heard as an industry.
Correct.
My ChatGPT has kickbacks that the global service department market is worth approximately $120 to $125 billion in annual revenue.
I like your number better.
We must be careful with ChatGPT, I hear.
Yes, it's to caveat that is a ChatGPT stat, so take it with a pinch of salt. But it has based that essentially on the most widely cited 2024 to 2025 market sizing reports, and some reports bundle in apart hotels, extended stay, and corporate housing into that mix. So,
wow.
Yeah. On that note, I think that's probably all the time we've got. I know Jess is going to pop up and shout at me in a minute if I don't pass back over to her. So a massive thank you to everyone on the call, particularly obviously Barb and James for joining us today and giving up your time and being so open and transparent and brilliant with your discussion today. And thanks to you too, Kristen, and to Jess. Jess is as Barb lovely points out, our chief of staff, who is our brilliant organizer of all of these webinars that does it so brilliantly, and we are ever so grateful to Jess too.
She not only has this been rescheduled a few times, she's put up with our schedule, she's put up with all 4 of our big personalities. Big kudos to you, Jessica. As Barb calls her, the chief of staff.
Oh, thank you so much. I'd actually like to say a huge thank you to yourself, Jake and Kristen, and an even bigger thank you to our speakers, James and Barbara, for sharing such fantastic, sharp insights today. I will be sending across a follow-up email with the recording shortly. And if you'd like to continue a conversation to explore how Situ can support your mobility and travel needs, please visit staysitu.com, or you can reach out to one of the team directly. But yes, thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Situ webinar. Thank you so much. Goodbye.